Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program Mr. Stewart Richardson. And Stewart, or Scotty Richardson, is the president of Richardson Steirman, a publishing house here in New York City. Has a unique pattern of publishing, particularly relating to the works of Mikhail Gorbachev. And Mr. Richardson has a long history of understanding the publishing industry on an international scale. And Sandy Richardson, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you very much, Harold.
We did want to talk about some questions of publishing in a general sense, which you have a long involvement with, but you have this particular distinction, as it were, in a certain sense, of having been selected as the English-speaking publisher of the works of Mikhail Gorbachev. Was exciting, and I wonder if we might say that you have been, even from boyhood and so forth, you were interested personally in the history of Russia, the history of the Soviet experience,
yeah.
And maybe share a little bit of your own background in terms of your interest of the
Well,
Soviet
I guess when I was about 12 years old, Harold, I read a book called The River Roads of Russia, which was a book about the Norsemen, or the Varangians, coming from Norway and Sweden, the Vikings, really, essentially, who, instead of going west, this group went east and went down the river chain from the Neva River and all the way down through the Moscow River, which flows into the Dnieper, and down the Dnieper to Kiev. And they founded Vladimir, and that was founded by a man named Vladimir. It was, and also Rurik before him had discovered that, and Vladimir's son, Vladimir Monomakh, built Kiev. So I read all about that. And
I read romance, really.
Yeah, well, it was fascinating.
Yes,
and then I read about the boyars, which preceded the czars. I mean, they were really sort of landed gentry. They had serfs, and they had houses, and country houses, and city houses. And they were a very powerful force. And then the czars, the first czars, came, and their alliance was with the boyars. They had the support of the boyars and the support of the church, of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so I read all about that. Then I got down to Sir Bernard Pears, who wrote A History of Russia, which is a superb book. And by the time I was 14, I guess I had read maybe 15 or 20 books.
That is a lot.
And it was fascinating.
Yes.
And then I got interested in other things.
Yes.
But after the, somewhere in the 1960s, I got interested again because the world then Stalin was dead.
Yes.
And there seemed to be the possibility of going to Russia and seeing firsthand what I had seen that I'd read about for so long. So I did, and I got a book on the Russian astronauts.
You helped bring into being a book about the Russian astronauts.
Yeah, we commissioned it.
I see.
And I met all, Leonov and Kubasov and Shatalov and Bergovoy and all the Russian cosmonauts. As a matter of fact, I told Alan Shepard, one of our astronauts, that I knew more Russian astronauts than I knew American ones. Then I got them to join the Universal Copyright Convention.
Yes, you got the Soviet Union to do that.
That's first time
interesting
ever.
Story, yes, right. Because there have been problems, hadn't there?
Well, there had been a lot of piracy back and forth on both sides, I might add. And we had always been rather upset because the Russians seemed to take our books and not pay any royalties, or they would say they're paid in rubles and you can come and spend them here. And that was very unsatisfactory. So it all came down to Marshal Zhukov. Marshal Georgy I. Zhukov was sort of the Eisenhower, if you will, of the Soviet Union. He was a marshal. He was one of the architects of victory. He was the defender of Moscow during the Battle of Moscow, and essentially the major figure above the other Soviet marshals. And he wrote his memoirs.
Yes.
And they were serialized in a Soviet magazine, military magazine. And a friend of mine took the articles and put them into book form and called them My Six Great Battles by Marshal Georgy I. Zhukov. And the Russians were fit to be taught. I happened to be in Moscow at the time, and they just said this was the most terrible thing that had ever happened, because now the book itself was worth very little. It was eventually sold here for $10,000 or something like that. And they were more hurt that their national hero had been pirated
Yes,
and everything
indeed.
else.
Yeah, right.
So I said, they asked me, they tried to get me to agree how terrible it was, and I said, it isn't terrible at all, it's all your own fault.
Because they did not belong to any international...
Nothing, never had. Not through Tsarist times, never. So they said, what do you mean it's our fault? And I said, well, if you had joined, had you been a member of the International Universal Copyright Convention, this could never have happened. I said, how? And I explained. And so when I went back to the United States, I got some documents of pamphlets and whatnot from Geneva and sent them to. And in May 1973, in April, a delegation was here, and I held up my glass, and I said, I'm drinking a toast to the time when you all joined the Universal Copyright Convention.
Right.
And a man named Birch, who's now ambassador to Hungary, said, Mr. Richardson, Sandy, he said, we have now, as of May, he pronounces it, 1973, joining Universal Copyright Convention. So
Yeah,
they did.
all right. And that really has smoothed the way for greater cultural exchange and so forth.
Exactly, and
between
also from phonograph records to books to every kind of licensed thing is now paid for in the currency of the person who licensed it to a Soviet publisher. If we American publishers get paid in dollars, British publishers in pounds, French publishers in francs, German publishers in marks.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it's done in a very different way now.
So it made it easier, as it were, then for us to get information and there be an exchange of information, a greater degree of understanding.
And we pay royalties in dollars to them. They pay royalties in dollars to us.
Well, congratulations. Thank you for having done that. It paved the way for greater communication between the two countries. And you've maintained then an interest in the Soviet Union. You've been there a number of times.
I've been there 8 times.
8 times over since the 60s.
Since the 60s.
And you have a feel for it. You obviously had a feel for the geography, the poetry of the land, the spirit of the history of the culture and so forth. And you've struck a responding chord apparently with a number of the people there. And you like the culture and you like the people.
I like the people. There are 2 Russias. There is it's what the French say when they say there is France and there is le patrie, la patrie. In Russia there is Russia and there is Holy Russia. And by Holy Russia I mean the Baroshka forests and the feeling of the air, and the feeling of the cold, and the feeling of the winter, and the feeling of the late spring, and it's the land that gets them.
And there is a poetry that is part of the Russian...
Ray Allen Billington wrote a book called, James H. Billington wrote a book called The Icon on the Axe, which is about Russian, the feeling for the land, culture, and so on. And they are very much that way. They really love the land. And they love poetry. They love Pushkin. And they love Shiskin as an artist. And they love fairy tales. And they love, they're avid readers.
Yes, it's a rich culture.
Read a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
And James Michener is a bestseller there. Arthur Haley, they call it The Wheels, is a bestseller. Kurt Vonnegut is a big bestseller. John Updike is a bestseller.
It's interesting, yeah.
Eudora Welty sells very well. Flannery O'Connor, to William Faulkner, very well. So they're very much interested. And there are bookstores that have nothing but a whole section on American books and translation.
We do not understand it well enough on the whole. The American people do not understand the Russian.
Well, they don't.
And the Russian, again, is like there's 100 nations. It's a vast land, 8.5 million square miles, and it's a very diverse land.
There are 13 republics.
Yes.
And probably something like 27 different languages. So most of them are now obliged to learn Russian as a second language.
Yes.
But it's a vast country. I mean,
indeed,
it goes through 13 time zones or 12 time zones, or some staggering number.
Yes, right.
From the frontier to Vladivostok.
And we probably,
around the world.
yes, indeed. And we do not understand the culture as well as we might, and let's hope will as we
Well, I
begin to
think
move in
that
perhaps
for
better
you know,
political waters.
for
in the future.
those people who saw the Kirov Ballet at Wolf Trap, the televised, for those who were there, they were even more fortunate. But it gives you an idea of the level of and the tremendous interest in ballet.
Yes.
But the level of performance that any member of the corps of ballet, de ballet at the Kirov could step right into the leading role without missing a beat. They're really very good.
Yeah, the dance is
And
really...
I was once in the Bolshoi Theater, and there was a Russian sitting next to me who had his work jacket on and sort of boots. And he just sat there morosely, and I thought, well, he's got a free ticket to the opera, I mean to the ballet, and he's not, he doesn't know anything about it. And I think it was Plisetskaya. It must have been 1970, and she was still dancing in Swan Lake. And as Odile, as Odette, she does the 42 fouettes, and this guy rose and started applauding and shouting, "Brava, brava, brava!" You know, and I thought, I thought he was just a rube.
Yeah,
you know?
right. But he was right in touch with it. Right.
He knew a heck of a lot more about ballet than I did.
Yeah, right.
I was just applauding politely.
Right, I understand, but he really felt it.
Yeah, I felt it
feeling,
very keenly.
And have you've
very
seen
deceptive that way.
And you've seen over that period of time since the '60s, you visited 8 times. Changes. The society is changing, and I know it's
more so since last September until this April of this year.
Yeah.
More change has occurred then than in any given year or 14 months hitherto.
And when we say change, there's a lot of. In what way can we perceive the change?
Well, the changes are first the morale of the people. In other words, waitresses, waiters, people who do things for people.
Yes.
Are, instead of being sort of sullen and sort of depressed or morose, they're cheerful and they're happy. Food is much better. Food has really improved 1,000% practically. And automobiles they've got a lot of one-way streets in Moscow because they have so many cars.
They have
the Indians now have cars now. The chiefs used to have them. So it's really changed a great deal. And I think a lot of it has, there are 2 reasons, I think. One is that Gorbachev has cut down the drinking hours from 2 till 7, and about 3/4 of all the liquor shops are closed.
That had been a real problem.
A very severe problem. I mean, for example, in the 1982 Olympics, they moved about 200,000 people out of Moscow because they were chronic drinkers and they wanted to get rid of them. But Gorbachev has sort of attacked it at the core, and he knows that it's a problem, and and a lot of absenteeism and a lot of sanitary are filled with people who have real serious problems. And it's a cold country.
Maybe they're taking all that vodka against the cold?
Right, exactly. Antifreeze,
yeah, right, in a certain sense. And also it's cloudy and gray. And,
well, sometimes it's sunny, but when it's sunny it can be cold too. But I think that's what he wanted to do is to, I mean, it's not prohibition, it's simply that he wants people to drink under a more controlled atmosphere. And people still have a lot to drink. I mean, if they have dinner, they can have all the vodka they want, so long as it's before 7 o'clock.
I see, but that had been a problem, whether or not it was a sign of the drinking, let's say. If we think they had that problem, whether it was a sign of an alienation?
I think so. As Gorbachev says, that everybody's been promised so much over the years that, that this 5-year plan was going to make everything beautiful for everybody, and it didn't. And I think
in a material sense, particularly,
in a material sense, in a sense of the quality of life, if you will, whatever that means. And so what happened is that with Gorbachev, at least they really feel that they could see some light out there somewhere.
Some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, some light, some better times ahead.
It's difficult for us, isn't it? And I suppose it comes up often in the Soviet, in your Soviet experience, because they still talk of the Great Patriotic War and the war of the 1940s.
They'll never forget that.
And it's hard for us in the United States, and I don't know if we could say it over and over.
Because they lost 20 million people in the war.
20 million people were killed.
Which is almost 8% of the population.
And they had a great deal of their industrial plant leveled, a great deal of
towns,
destruction.
1,700 towns and villages were destroyed, rubble.
Tremendous destruction, all of which had to be built up afterward without any help from the outside, as it were.
It was rebuilt
during the Marshall Plan.
It was rebuilt during the Cold War.
Yes, indeed. And so there was...
And so if you talk to, Russians who are friends of yours, I mean, nobody really, they don't resent it. But they do say that while the Cold War was going on in the United States and the Europe, there was a lot of friction and so on. They said that they had to go about rebuilding Russia, which is the Russian Federated Republic, where most of the damage took place.
All the infrastructure.
And so they had to build, rebuild railways, bridges, villages, towns, and so on. And so it was a big job.
Yeah, and there wasn't any assistance from the outside.
Well, there was some assistance because in Stalingrad, which is now called Volgograd.
Yes.
They changed the name. After Stalin died, they changed a lot of names that had Stalin in them. And it was part of Khrushchev's de-Stalinization program, which is really basically stuck. But there, in Volgograd, I mean, it's just unbelievable because there's a rotunda with something like 440,000 names of the people that they knew were killed there. And they have the memorial that they left was a big debate about outside of the Statue of Victory, which is sort of like about the size of the Statue of Liberty, a little less, on top of Mamaia Hill, which is one of the hills they fought over for so long. Aside from that, and the rotunda, which is a great big round thing, looks like a squat Madison Square Garden, but it has all the names and an eternal flame and so on. Besides that, they left one memorial, and that was a house called the Pavlov House. It was an apartment house, and for 60 days, the Germans were in one end and the Russians were in the other end of the same apartment house. And they never were able to, one or the other were able to take it until the Germans surrendered.
That was that was a turning point.
And they left the house just the way it is. It's in a beautiful park, and here you see this absolutely destroyed house. I mean, everything's going, it's like an apartment house, but floors going this way and that way.
Do you think we're sufficiently appreciative of the scars, as it were, in a personal sense, that there was from that period by
think so,
Soviets and their attitude toward the outside world? Their distrust. They've been invaded so often. And I
think it would be hard for most people to really understand it unless you were there and saw the... I mean, for example, I was in Leningrad, and I went to the graves outside of Leningrad, and 600,000 are buried there, and they're buried by months and years. These great big mounds, and they say, June 1942, and So when I was there, I took a high school friend of mine, one of my best friends, was killed over Dusseldorf in a raid. His plane was shot down. And that was in June 1942. So I took a bouquet. I bought a bouquet of roses and walked down to the June 1942 grave in Leningrad and left them there with a note. But it's unbelievable. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I mean, it's like a half a mile of straight down with one great big mound after the other. Yeah, and so that there are scars of that psychologically and otherwise, and the attitudes toward the outside world and the need to protect, as it were, Mother Russia and Russia. I don't think they're not as, oddly enough, I think it goes the other way, basically. It may go, the government may feel that way. The people feel that they never want to talk about a war again. The people who experience the Holocaust or know people that have say never again. And the Russians have that same feeling. Attitude toward never again. They never want to do this again. They never want to participate in this again. So when the president engages in some of his sort of
evil empire.
Evil empire things and whatnot.
Yeah.
They do not take exception to that, except to say that we don't feel that way. I mean, about the United States, about Americans, we don't feel that way. And we hope that Americans themselves will vote against this sort of talk. In other words, they don't want to get into, they don't like the arms race, they don't like any of that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm talking about people that I know who are not in publishing, you know, they're just people you talk to.
Right. I see. Well, yeah.
So they don't have that feeling at all. They have no basic combativeness about the United States or about any of that sort of stuff. They don't really have it.
Mm-hmm. They might well perceive that the greatest threat to the peace of the world or something
they
would
say
be
they say that
attitude of the United
people
States
in big countries should think alike.
Yeah. They say that people in
big countries should. They think Americans think a lot like Russians because we're both from big countries. That's their simplicity. Simplistic way of looking at it, and I think it's probably pretty correct. They say they feel they have more in common with Americans that they meet in Moscow and various places than they do with meeting a European, because a European is from a smaller country, you know, and has different views. Whereas large countries have a great variety, and they make the point. I mean, these are just average people.
Yeah.
They make the point that Americans have many nationalities, just as we have many nationalities.
It's interesting, yeah.
I mean, it's a polyglot society.
It's rather more melded here than I think there, though. I mean, I think the nationalists hold
it's
more
melded because only in the sense that in Moscow, which is their version of Washington, you find all kinds of different members of different republics. And a lot of them have come to Moscow to work.
They have, of course, a socialist system and a socialist orientation. I wonder if that difference, let's say if we have a difference between what we're trying to talk about, and we certainly want to talk about Mr. Gorbachev's writings that you're publishing, but the difference between a socialist perception of a social organization, a capitalist perception, the writings of Marx, the writings of Lenin, are these things have meaning to them as they
I think they
feel there's
let
a
me
historical
just put it this
mission
way. The from a Russian point of view, they have like well, just take an ordinary guy, you know, that has a job that may pay, you know, luckily 200 rubles a month.
What's that? Is that roughly the same as $1? Or?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
And he pays $25 a month for his apartment, roughly.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
And you know, $3 a month for telephone, and the rest is for food and whatever savings they can achieve.
How do they work that out, if I may? I mean, how do they work at 25?
Because the state subsidizes housing.
They subsidize it, so it's...
And they all get a month's vacation a year paid. Sure, they may go to a sanitarium, which is like their version of Miami Beach, you know, or a resort. And education is free, medicine is free. You know, they have no real expenses. You know, I mean, no major expenses. In other words, they're not paying a quarter of their income in rent.
Yeah, there's no, you don't have the rent gouging and the kinds of...
And food is very reasonable. That's not expensive. Unless you go to a peasant's market. Now, the peasant's markets in Moscow are like... take Balducci's and multiply it by 100, and you'll find that they have these huge markets, like the Central Market, which is a free market. In other words, they have plume de veau, they have, you know, everything you can possibly imagine there. 30 different kinds of cheese, you know.
And that's all regulated by what the market will bear?
These are entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so there the market
Then the market forces the price, you see, so it's more expensive.
Yeah.
And they only use it for special occasions. For example, if they want a roast of veal for some super occasion, or they want to make a veal Prince Orloff, or some fancy veal dish. They will go to the market to buy the veal there because it's superb, and they don't really beef and pork and chicken and all that sort of stuff they can get at the regular markets.
They can get that in these normally, normal fare and so forth is becoming increasingly available. One had the
better food,
impression
I mean, for example, fresh vegetables. I mean, fresh vegetables in the sense of Brussels sprouts and broccoli and things like that in the wintertime were unknown 6 years ago.
Now it's beginning to come in.
Yeah, and shrimp in restaurants. I mean, there's a fish restaurant and they have marvelous shrimp. These tiny.
Now, this isn't just things that you happen to have available to because you were coming from the outside.
No, the restaurant. We just walked into a restaurant.
Right. You know what I'm saying.
No, it wasn't. It couldn't have been set up because other people were eating them too. But they had never had shrimp in Moscow until about 4 years ago.
Well, I wonder if that's a sign that they had. Let's say, in a classic example, is that they were building their economic base, they were building their capital base, they were putting their infrastructure back together, they were investing back in the economy. They had, as we, a heavy burden of military investment and so forth.
They still do.
Unfortunately, that we have to have. So that they just didn't have left over. They weren't able to allow the consumer things to come out.
That's right, they weren't.
But now they're beginning to do it, so life is lightening up.
I think so, very much so, yeah. I spent about 55 minutes with Gorbachev in April, on the 4th of April. I was supposed to be there for about 15 minutes, and it ended up that we talked for 55 minutes.
You were there, if I may. You were there because you were presenting him copies of books.
Leather-bound copies of these books.
If you could, we could talk about that you'd been, through your journeys and your being there and so forth, had developed a relationship to where you were going to become the publisher of his writings here.
Well, what happened was that I wrote a letter to, actually I started out with Andropov.
All right.
And I wrote a letter to Andropov suggesting he do a book. And Andropov, I never did get a response because he fell ill.
Yes.
And he wasn't about to do a book. And then I wrote a letter to, I had done Brezhnev, a book of Brezhnev's at Doubleday. But then I wrote to Chernenko.
Had you met with Brezhnev in the course of doing that book?
I said hello to him, but I didn't have, just at a reception. But in any case, so then I wrote to Chernenko, and I was advised by a guy in Washington, and he said, you really ought to write to Gorbachev in addition. So I wrote a letter to Gorbachev.
So you can see he was coming.
By the time that the letter to Chernenko arrived, he was dead.
Yeah.
And so Gorbachev got his letter, and nothing happened for about 2 months. Then I was told he had read the letter, and he thought it was too early and later. Then in August of 1985, he said, they said that the General Secretary has decided to go ahead.
Good.
And so I went to Moscow and spent some time at the International Book Fair, and then spent a lot of time wrestling with the manuscript. And we had a big battle.
And you had proposed that he publish certain of his things. What had you proposed to him?
Just foreign policy. He wanted to do, the book was about twice as big as what we...
You had proposed that he do a book for the English language.
Yeah, on foreign policy.
On foreign policy, right? Okay.
And he agreed to that. And as a matter of fact, when this book, when A Time for Peace came out, it was the only edition available in the world. So we were able to sell quite a few thousand copies of our edition to other countries.
And it garnered tremendous attention at the time, just in the press and so forth, because it was a major event, having his views put into a book
networks and all that sort of stuff. Right. Came down to our office and so on. It was pretty hectic.
They should put attention on that.
And we got it out about a week before, 10 days before the summit.
I see.
And then we sold about 40,000 of that. And then we did the Coming Century piece, which is very interesting because it represents Gorbachev becoming himself. In the first part of the first book, he is obviously paying some lip service to the collective leadership still. In the latter part, he changes, and in the Coming Century of Peace, you really hear his own voice much more.
So there is a chronology here. Yeah, the Time for Peace was actually just as he was coming into power, as it were, and the Coming Century of Peace as he's beginning to consolidate.
I think that, for example, in talking to him, I think he said that he would rather spend, if he had 10 rubles, he'd want to spend 10 rubles on home policy, 50 kopecks on on better pay for teachers and 25 kopecks for
military,
or 50 kopecks for military.
Mm-hmm.
We said that's the proper proportion.
So if he had 10 rubles, a kopeck is a hundredth of a ruble?
Yeah,
or something?
right.
So he just wanted to spend relatively little on the military.
defense. Yeah, he doesn't want. He says it's a. He told me that.
This is again in that meeting that you had with him.
Yeah, the 55
you were there
minutes.
just recently. That was
in
just
April,
a few months
yeah,
back,
April.
right? And you were going to present him with copies of the book.
I did,
And
leather-bound copies.
I see, right. And you were going to have a more or less formal meeting, but you had rather
supposed
a long
to be
time,
15 minutes at the
or
most, but
Uh-huh.
he sat down and we, as a matter of fact, when you go into he's in the Central Committee building. He's not
Yes.
in the Kremlin.
Uh-huh.
And when you go in, there are two guards, and they salute you. And there are two doors. And inside there are two other guards. And there's an elevator, and it has 6 floors. And a man steps forward and unlocks the elevator. And then it opens, and you go in. And when you're in, he locks it again.
Uh-huh.
And you go to the 6th floor. And you go down a long corridor, short corridor, then a long corridor, with very modern sort of buttery black leather furniture, very, and glass tables.
Uh-huh.
And you sit there for a couple of minutes. The man comes and says, the General Secretary will see you now. And you go into a little ante-room, and a door opens, and there's a long table, must have 24 chairs on each side of it, and a desk at the very end of the room.
Uh-huh.
And he comes, bounces out from around the desk, and walks 3/4 of the way to you as you're marching down the side of the table. And he says,
Good morning.
Doubleday, good morning, how are you?
Friendly fellow.
Yeah, and you say, Doubleday, I'm fine.
Do you speak
And
Russian?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And he says, and so we sat down, and a translator in between us, and at the end of the table, we were sitting opposite. And presently, a woman comes in and puts down there was caviar with little things, puts down a cup of coffee and a cup of tea.
What time of day was it?
It was 4 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So what happens is, instead of saying, would you care for tea or coffee, and then having to go back and do it, they just put both down, and you take your choice.
Socialist efficiency.
Right, exactly. So I selected the coffee, and I noticed that when she went around to the table to the General Secretary, to Gorbachev, she put just coffee down. He was having coffee too. So,
but he's a friendly man.
I like him. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I feel that he is. I think I have a pretty good idea about judging someone as real or as a poser or a phony or not telling the truth or trying to get an edge. None of that. He's absolutely straight ahead as far as I'm concerned. I think he's very straight.
Is it a little bit different than some of the people that you had dealings with as you conceived of it in the Soviet Union in the past?
Well, he's got a lot of he's been smart enough to take Ambassador Dobrynin and put him in charge essentially of foreign policy. He has taken the former ambassador to Canada, a man named Yakovlev, and put him on the Central Committee. And the former ambassador to Bonn, West Germany, is now the head of the largest press agency in the Soviet Union. And apparently he has been criticizing back about 3 months ago, criticizing the Soviet people involved in information and blah, blah, abroad. Because he thinks they've been too antediluvian and not up to date. So I think there's going to be some shakes up there, and they'll probably get more people who are a little more sophisticated, open, and interested in the countries and interested in talking to people and more open.
It's a changing. Do you sense it's a changing of the guard from the old order?
Well, say that he's Peter the Great is an exaggeration, but he is really getting people around him who have had a lot of experience in the West, and he's been to England, he's been to France, he's been to and he will be coming to the United States.
I was thinking he was 14 at the end of the war, for instance.
Yeah, he was
the
born
Great
in
War.
1955.
So he would have been.
He graduated from school in 1955.
Yeah, he was relatively.
Yeah.
It wasn't as though he was a grown man involved in the war, the marshals, and the sense of the war, the patriotic remembrance of that. But it's a new, younger breed, and it's a new changing of the guard of the.
And he is bringing in a lot of
and
people from the academic community, and a lot of people who have had experience abroad.
Experience abroad, so perhaps they're more.
He wants advice from
or
people who've been there and who know people and how people behave.
I think they're a little less paranoid, if that's the right word.
Oh,
Paranoid is an overword.
I think that's gone. A lot of that's gone. I think a lot of it's gone, at least from my point of view. And I'm maybe a privileged character there, because I've been there so many times. So I think a lot of it's gone. I mean, I find that Gorbachev is far and away the most direct person in power that I've ever met.
I think I've heard you say at one point where he seems like the chairman of the board of a Midwestern company or something like that.
Middle Western corporation, with plans, And he said, somebody said, I'm going to do this. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do this, and I want to do this. And it may be tough to get there, but I'm going to get there.
Yeah. And he has a deep and abiding. It comes out in the works. I mean, there's speeches and so forth that are contained within the books. There's a rather long one on the conditions of nuclear peace and so forth.
That's right.
He's strongly, one gets the impression, he's strongly, firmly, without just rhetoric, committed to disarmament as an overriding goal.
That's his overriding policy. That is his number one priority.
And you sense in your discussions with him, or your discussion with him and so forth,
he laughed at
a veracity there, that a true feeling with that, and
yes, absolutely.
the possibility of that.
Oh, he doesn't really even make any bones about that. As a matter of fact, after the Libyan, I was there during I guess I just went to there in March, just after the first bombing of Libya. And he gave a speech, about an hour, that was carried on television. And I got a simultaneous translation on Moscow English language radio while I was watching him, so I could get every bit of it. And he never once mentioned the Libyan bombing. The one thing that he was concerned about was the United States resuming atomic testing. That's what he was really the most worried about. And he said, I would like to meet President Reagan anywhere, tomorrow, next week, next month, as soon as possible, to discuss this matter.
He really has been very forthcoming with...
That's his number one thing. That bothers him more than anything else. And Chernobyl bothered him deeply because they tried to cover it up. In other words, the Regional Atomic Power Commission tried to cover it up, and so it took 2 days for the real truth to get to Moscow.
And that bothered him? That they
Gorbachev was furious because he wanted to know, so he would know how to assess the damage and take whatever steps.
Well, I mean, bureaucratically, they tried to cover it up.
Yeah, bureaucratically,
right.
It's like take the challenge.
Yeah, right.
Take the story of which just came out of the first one, 31 seconds away from liftoff with not enough fuel to come back. Right. So that never would have come out had not the investigation taken place. So at least the official version is that they were doing things at the plant while the thing was supposed to be down and under repair or something like that. And they did something that blew it. They shouldn't have done, a procedure they shouldn't have done. And they covered it up until it was an embarrassment internationally before the Central Committee really knew the details of what had happened, because the guy the head of the Kiev Russian atomic energy system
was tried
to cover it up. Didn't want to lose his job, be in disgrace and whatnot, so he tried to get these guys to fix it, and in doing so resulted in a lot of people being very severely radiated for doing getting that close to it.
Right, and also the leader couldn't get the information he'd need in order to do it, and he's been trying to shake that system up and make it a little bit much.
Well, he was furious with that. A lot of them lost their jobs because they just have. This guy, particularly the boss, for not being forthcoming. I mean, he should have reported it right away.
And you do sense that this is an overriding priority of his, and that he means it. And when he says we're going to have a reduction in X number
I think he
of years,
really wants to do it.
He means that reduction.
Right.
He even looks toward the end of the. He looks toward the end of the century as a nuclear-free world, which sounds
would you believe that the
idealistic.
President of the United States has written him a letter, prefatory to a summit meeting, saying we think it's a good idea.
Well, he has said that, and it's supposedly tied into some agreements on the Strategic Defense Initiative, which seems to be a horror from their perspective. They
one by one voted in the
militarizing
Congress,
space.
but the point is that if you really want to know, it's not going to work anyway.
Yeah,
It'll work. You spend $80 billion, and it's going to be flip a coin as whether it really work anyway. There are two phases of it. One is to hit the missiles while they're coming up over the other country. Two is to hit them when they're coming into this country. You're still going to detonate atomic bombs. They're not going to.
I understand.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're going to talk about radiation. But the Russians won't. See, their point about it is they don't want it because they don't want to have to horse around and figure out a countermeasure for it.
Right. Well, that would be increasingly having to have monies go into military.
So we would
patterns
spend $80 billion on that, and they would spend 10% of their gross national product or whatever the heck it is, trying to figure out a way of beating it.
And his attitude, more or less, is, look, let's just stop all
Let's
this
stop
and get rid
all
of
this
it and
nonsense
start
and
building
cool
for
it.
peace.
Cool
Right?
it,
Is
yeah.
more or less his position. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it an idealistic position?
No,
is it,
what he
he's
says
practical
is
man, but it sounds,
he wants to
for
phase
some
it.
reason we can trust each other in a way that we
Phase it
haven't.
down. Well, he also wants to propose phasing down conventional forces too.
Is there
so they're
some
parity.
I wonder if it's a Marxian analysis, or if it's a Marxian view, or if it's growing out of their own experience, that they would sense that for some reason we've had a situation of animosity between, let's say, the Soviet Union and the Western world over a period of time, with distrustfulness on both sides, a building of an atomic countermeasures to one another and so forth. Is he proposing that there is something or some sort of an alteration in the broad human condition, or something that would make
His
for
point is that
trustful, peaceful world now that hasn't been possible historically?
I said to him, well, we have the view of,
What?
he said, an atomic weapons of buy now and pay later.
Yeah.
And he laughed at that. He said, that's what the two American senators who were here this morning said.
Buy now, pay later.
Yeah. In other words, we're spending, our budget, military budget is huge. And it's huge. And theirs is huge. And Gorbachev said to me, he said, we both have this problem. And every time something new comes along, something becomes obsolescent because then you have to build something new.
Yes, on the face of it, it's obvious, right?
You're dealing with obsolescence in nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And old systems won't work, so you scrap those, and you get new systems, and then they don't work, so you get newer systems, and it's like a palimpsest. Everything's built on obsolescence. The costs never end.
That's right. And
you never get to the point where there's a sufficiency, because they always have to be newer. And every time we do something new, they have to try to do something
But
new.
isn't that the history of the world, in a certain sense?
Well,
it's been the history of the world in a large measure.
Except nowadays, you're going to have to, you got all these warheads to deal with.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. All I'm saying is that I think that he's serious.
Yeah, he is serious in that, and I wasn't trying to be, unusual, or it's probably not your position.
I think
really,
we're probably as difficult as they are, if not more so.
Yeah, whether
in many
they
ways.
perceive within the Soviet view of things that there's been a development of enough technological ability to allow for an understanding of sufficiency, or that there are conditions that could make for a peaceful world, almost
well, I don't.
do you understand, rather than
they
an
have
adversarial
outside
view
of
between the nations,
a
large historical
I wrote
view.
the president a letter, and I said to him,
Vision.
Mr. President, why don't you have a low-level meeting with the Soviet Union and work out a joint program to combat terrorism. You know, we'll take care of our people, you take care of your people, and see if we can't figure out a way of cutting it down. And I mean, why not have us come up with an idea once in a while? Because we don't have any. You know, do you notice the president hasn't proposed one single thing? He keeps saying, we've talked about this in Geneva, but you never read the agenda of what's being talked about. We ought to propose a couple of things and see whether they fly or not. I mean, it's a good test. For example, if we had a joint agreement on combating terrorism around the world, wherever it occurred, and had, you know, each country would be alerted about it, and then to see which one would really sort of deal with it. It would be a good test. Would they agree?
Or even go, yeah, right. Well, that would be an interesting. That would be something different test, kind of test to where they could have a commonality of interest. Gore Vidal has suggested that the Western European countries might form common interest against the Asiatic, the entrepreneurial developments of the Asiatics, which are taking over increasingly market share in the world and so forth. We might have a commonality of economic interests among the Western European nations, as it were, which was just sort of interesting.
He's got a good idea, but the problem is not that. The problem is the pay scales.
Yeah, right. But the point is that there could be commonality of interest between the Western, or to ourselves and the Soviets, that perhaps
Soviets buying a lot of stuff from Japan because we won't sell it to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Computers and advanced equipment and whatnot. They're buying from Japan and Korea because we won't sell it to them.
And back again to what you said, that he said to you that he would prefer to have the 10 rubles spent on domestic improvement of their condition, as minimal amount as possible on the military. And
well, you see, it's a question of whether we're cutting services in this country. That's got to tell you something. It's got to tell you something. Money's going somewhere else because services have been cut. Human services are being cut regularly. In every budget, they get smaller and smaller as a percentage of the budget itself. So that I think old Gorby may have a point. You know.
A point in the sense of
the point that if we weren't, look, if you cut your missiles in half, you'd still kill everybody twice if you went to war.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
I mean, that's not, it's negotiation is gesture more as much as anything else. You know?
I wonder if the attitude that he manifests toward that question, these practical, like Midwestern business attitude that you have and so forth, is reflective of a less paranoid view of the world, one that could see the practicality of the need for the nations to be together in a way that we haven't been, which is seemingly idealistic, but in the real historical sense is the ultimate practicality of which direction we have to go.
He's not,
and the United States is lagging behind. We're lagging behind.
He's no idealist. He's practical.
Right,
but what he's saying is it'll work better this way for everybody.
Yeah.
And for us particularly. But for everybody. And I think the argument that's been forwarded that we put pressure on the Soviet economy by increasing the number of arms that we produce is like saying if a rich person outspends a poor person 12-1 in a poker game, he's going to intimidate the small bettor. But on the other hand, he's also going to produce his capital if he loses a few hands.
That's right. Yeah, right.
So I mean, I don't know whether that really is whether it is or not. It's not what made this country great anyway. In the past.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. But you are generally encouraged by what you find in your recent experience there, and the direction that you see them going.
Gorbachev sent a signal on pulling out 12,000 guys, out of Afghanistan, not replacing them. We said that's a normal thing. What we should have said was, that's the first step.
Yeah.
And we're eager to see when the next shoe will drop. Instead of saying you see what I mean? There's a different.
To give an encouragement to that direction.
Yeah, you want to encourage a guy, say, this is a move in the right direction. We hope that we've looked on it with interest, and we hope that whether you believe it or not. You want to say that because then you'll say this is a very positive step, and we hope it will be followed by other positive steps.
It is encouraging, isn't it, that President Reagan has been able to answer, and that we are now moving, this being August of 1986, moving apparently toward, after the hiatus in that, I guess it was the Libyan bombing really put a kind of quirk in things and so forth, but they seem to be, the ambassadors are getting together, Schultz and so forth, to set up a summit that might happen here.
Curiously enough, the Russians there's no love lost between the Soviet Union and Gaddafi, strangely enough, because if they had, they would have been outraged. Well, they weren't outraged.
There was some delay in the, presumably in the development of a summit meeting over what. Well,
that's true. But, I mean, they didn't think that it was a very intelligent move on our part. Naturally, I mean, you know, it's from their point of view, it was sort of embarrassing to immediately shake hands with somebody who's bombed another country and, you know, deep-sixed about, you know, 6 of their torpedo boats and one with about 60 people aboard that was hit by a missile and never knew what happened. They all went down to the bottom.
I wonder if that might lead toward them developing a base there or not. I don't know what's going to happen.
The Russians, no, they won't do that.
They wouldn't do that. Well, in any event,
they prefer to get to the table and let bygones be bygones, and we'd hope that that business wouldn't. You see, this is why I really felt the joint approach towards terrorism would be much better, because Syria is a Soviet client state, if you will, and the Bekaa Valley is where Abu Nidal operates, and we had it all wrong because it wasn't the Libyans that did the discotheque in Berlin; it was the Abu Nidal group from Lebanon, and we bombed the wrong guy.
Yeah, we not only
they've never been able to correct that.
We not only bombed the wrong guy, but we did tremendous damage. There were more people killed in that attack than were killed by terrorists in the whole year. Ramsey Clark suggested that President Reagan ought to be impeached, that he was...
Well, I don't know about that. I like Ramsey
he suggested
a lot.
that. He suggested that. He said that he was trying to kill a foreign leader and bombed it, and that it was an act of barbarism and they ought to be impeached for the act.
What amused me
even
about
though there's an 80%
what amused me about all this, look, I'm a patriot. I'm not a... You know, I like the Russians because I'm interested in them, but I'm an American. But what did amuse me was first of all, when Caspar Weinberger and Schultz had the press conference after the raid, and Weinberger made the point that some of the damage was caused by SAM missiles that were fired straight up and came straight down, and denied that there was it was impossible there would be any damage to the French embassy. Indeed, there was.
Yes, indeed.
And indeed, the missiles are never shot straight up anyway, because they're heat-seeking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I understand.
So, you know, anyway, it's sort of fun.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I think that I'm sort of interested in as an observer in the foibles of one's own country and the foibles of the Soviet Union and how countries behave. And I think that we're in a state now of gradual maturity. I think the president, having had his illness and fortunately, knock on wood, gotten by that, has 2 years to go to figure out whether he's going to have a place in history, the history of this country, or not.
And we're coming right down to the wire.
And we're coming down to the wire, so he's got 2 years to get stuff going. And I think there's never been a president, with the possible exception of maybe Calvin Coolidge, who hasn't really felt that they wanted to do something in their administration that would get him into the history books. Because that, and he's down to the wire.
If we could collectively find our way through to the kind of proposals that Mr. Gorbachev has proposed and is proposing in terms of the...
And Reagan seems to be responding to.
And Reagan is responding too.
That's the first time that that's happened.
Yeah.
With this intensity.
Right, I understand. And if we could get through to where some of the views that Mr. Gorbachev has, right, of these could be implemented in terms of the reduction of nuclear weapons by 50% within a short number of years, and the ultimate elimination
by
of that
2000
by the
is what he would like.
That would be a tremendous tribute to the wisdom of our being able to respond and find a common course to that.
Well, I would
It
hope
be
so.
spelling a different kind of world than the one that we've unfortunately been dealing with in the past, and so it makes it a tremendously exciting and challenging time now.
He made the point with me that he's also very concerned about proliferation of nuclear weapons. That's the other point.
Well, as I say, again, if he could, the work of Mr. Gorbachev and that's been proposed in the books that you put forth is extremely exciting. It's very challenging to the future of the United States, and one can only hope that we can find our way through to find the to get past the differences that could allow
I think we will.
I'm
confident. I'm confident we will. I mean, it's just really a question of listening and making proposals and being responsible internationally, and I think we will. You can't really, we're not in a position where each of us can trust each other implicitly, but we're in a position where we can negotiate.
Yeah, because out of some change in the geopolitical realities allow for these things to happen, one could hope that they would be able to emerge in the months and years ahead. And it would seem to me, if I may, that your work in helping to pave the way with the International Copyright Convention agreement with the Soviet Union, and then providing us with well-edited and well-put-together and thoughtful perception of Mr. Gorbachev, and authentic perception that he has, and publishing that material here in the United States is going a long way toward helping move us all in that collectively beneficial direction. I'd like to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
And to wish you well
so.
in our own interest
in
doing that. And as we come up to the summit, there will be increased interest in the words of Mr. Gorbachev, and I certainly do thank you very much for participating and for sharing your perceptions, rather unique and interesting perceptions of the developments there in the Soviet Union. Extremely exciting and interesting. We'd like to be in continuing touch with you, and let's hope for positive directions as we look ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks,
I would like to remind you, it's been your pleasure then to have the perceptions of Stewart or Sandy Richardson, who is president of Richardson Steirman, a publishing company that has had the honor and privilege and of publishing Mikhail Gorbachev's materials more recently here in the United States, and we look forward to increasing publication from that house by Mr. Gorbachev. Happy to have been able to bring you those perceptions. We in Conversation would like to invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back next week. That's it for this particular segment. We'll see you next week. Mr. Richardson, thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Good night. See you next week.